Footsteps echoed against the cold pavement of a Brooklyn shipyard. A loaded Glock leveled at the head of a trembling blind woman who had simply heard too much. Gabriel West gave the silent nod to pull the trigger. Then she whispered a name that froze the underworld's most ruthless kingpin. Gabriel West did not become the undisputed architect of the New York syndicate by leaving loose ends. Operating from a seemingly legitimate import-export firm high above Wall Street, Gabriel had spent the last 4 years transforming his family's fragmented criminal empire into a ruthless, precision-driven machine. He was a man hollowed out by grief, functioning on cold logic and unfiltered vengeance. Ever since his wife, Isabella, was killed in a devastating car bombing outside a Mulberry Street restaurant, Gabriel had systematically eradicated his rivals. He wore his tragedy like a bespoke Tom Ford suit, immaculate, dark, and impenetrable. Cadence Lopez lived in an entirely different New York. Blind since birth, the 26-year-old navigated her world through a tapestry of sound, texture, and scent. She possessed absolute pitch, a gift that earned her a respectable living as a master piano technician for Steinway and Sons. Cadence spent her days running her sensitive fingers over ivory keys, adjusting the tension of steel strings in the opulent living rooms of Manhattan's elite. On a crisp Tuesday evening, Cadence was dispatched to the penthouse suite of the Plaza Hotel. The wealthy owner was supposedly away in Europe, and Cadence had been instructed to service a rare Yamaha grand piano before his return. For 2 hours, the only sounds in the sprawling, dimly lit suite were the harmonious strikes of chords and the soft tapping of Cadence's carbon fiber cane against the Persian rugs. She was just packing her velvet-lined toolkit when the heavy oak double doors of the penthouse burst open. Cadence froze behind the massive curve of the piano. She held her breath, pressing her back against the polished mahogany. Heavy, purposeful footsteps entered the room. 3 distinct gaits. One was frantic, slipping slightly on the marble foyer, a man in pure panic. The second was steady, heavy-set, boots squeaking faintly. The third was rhythmic, unhurried, commanding. "Please, Gabriel, I swear to God, the wire tap wasn't my idea," a voice pleaded. It was a nasal, terrifyingly familiar voice. Cadence recognized it from the evening news broadcasts. It was federal judge Richard Higgins. "I gave you $3 million to ensure that warrant never saw the light of day, Richard," a deep, gravelly baritone responded. The voice sent a chill straight down Cadence's spine. It was eerily calm, devoid of any human empathy. "The FBI bypassed me. The Southern District pushed it through without my authorization," Higgins sobbed, his knees hitting the floor with a dull thud. There was a metallic clink. The distinct, sharp sound of a vintage Zippo lighter flipping open, followed by the soft hiss of a flame, and the rich, pungent scent of a Cohiba cigar filling the room. "You were meant to be my wall, Richard," Gabriel said softly. "A wall that crumbles is just debris." Cadence squeezed her eyes shut, clapping her hands over her ears, but she couldn't block out the suppressed pft-pft of a Heckler and Koch pistol. The judge's body hit the floor, lifeless. In her sheer terror, Cadence's elbow grazed her tool bag. A heavy brass tuning hammer slipped from the edge of the piano bench, clattering loudly against the hardwood floor. The room went deathly silent. "Verlin," Gabriel murmured, the cigar smoke thick in his words. Heavy hands seized Cadence's shoulders, dragging her out from behind the piano. She cried out, her cane clattering away. Verlin Marshall, Gabriel's most brutal enforcer, slammed her roughly into a velvet armchair. She was behind the Yamaha, boss, Verlin growled. He waved a massive hand in front of Cadence's wide, sightless eyes. She's blind. Look at the cane. Gabriel stepped closer. Cadence could hear the soft rustle of expensive wool and smell the intoxicating blend of sandalwood, tobacco, and cordite. She felt the ambient heat of his presence. Blind, Gabriel stated, his voice devoid of pity. But not deaf. She heard the name. She heard the transaction. I didn't see anything, I swear, Cadence sobbed, her hands trembling violently in her lap. I'm just the piano tuner. I don't know who you are. I won't say a word. People always say that, Gabriel replied quietly. And then they sit in front of a grand jury. Take her to the Navy Yard, Verlin. The old dry dock. Make it quiet. Leave no trace. An hour later, the salty, freezing wind of the East River whipped across Cadence's face. She had been shoved into the back of a Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon, driven in agonizing silence to the desolate Brooklyn Navy Yard. Her knees scraped against the jagged, rusted metal of an abandoned shipping container as Verlin forced her down. Gabriel had followed in his own vehicle. He always oversaw the disposal of high-profile liabilities. He stood a few feet away, his leather gloves entirely clean, listening to the rhythmic sloshing of the dark water against the pier. Make it quick, Gabriel ordered, turning his back to the scene, checking the glowing dial of his Patek Philippe Nautilus. Cadence felt the cold, circular muzzle of the Glock 19 press against the back of her skull. The metallic click of the safety being disengaged echoed in her ears like a thunderclap. Her mind raced. She was going to die. She thought of the cold, dark water. She thought of the gravelly voice, the scent of the cigar, the distinct rhythmic clink of that Zippo lighter. The Zippo lighter, a memory 4 years old, struck her with the force of a freight train. A woman in a hospital bed, her face swathed in bandages, whispering about a man with a silver Zippo lighter who smelled of sandalwood and cohibas. "Isabella!" Cadence screamed, her voice tearing through the howling Brooklyn wind. Isabella said the man with the silver lighter was a protector. She said Gabriel wouldn't hurt the innocent. The gun remained pressed to her head, but the trigger was not pulled. Gabriel froze. The name hit him like a physical blow, paralyzing his lungs. He spun around, staring at the trembling girl on her knees. "Wait," Gabriel commanded, his voice suddenly unstable. Verlin hesitated, keeping the weapon leveled. "Boss?" Gabriel closed the distance in 3 massive strides. He grabbed Cadence by the lapels of her coat, hauling her up so violently her feet left the ground. His breath was hot against her face, laced with a sudden, desperate fury. "Where did you hear that name?" Gabriel snarled, his composure completely shattered. "Who told you about Isabella?" "Mount Sinai," Cadence gasped, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. 4 years ago, please, she talked about you." Gabriel stared at her all-seeing eyes. His wife had been dead for 4 years. The police report stated she had died instantly in the blast. No one, not even his closest men, knew the private details Isabella had spoken of in the privacy of their home. "Put the gun down, Verlin," Gabriel breathed, his hands shaking slightly as he lowered Cadence back to the ground. "Put her in my car, now." The drive to Scarsdale was suffocating. Cadence sat in the plush leather passenger seat of Gabriel's Range Rover autobiography, the doors locked from the master switch. Gabriel drove in complete silence, the engine letting out a low, predatory growl as they tore up the Hutchinson River Parkway. Cadence's heart hammered against her ribs. She was acutely aware of the dangerous man beside her. The ruthless kingpin had been reduced to a tense, breathing statue at the mere mention of a ghost. They arrived at Gabriel's sprawling, heavily fortified estate in Westchester County. Iron gates screeched open, and armed guards immediately surrounded the vehicle. Gabriel bypassed them all, gripping Cadence's arm with a firm but surprisingly careful hold, guiding her up the limestone steps and into his private study. The heavy mahogany doors clicked shut, sealing them inside. A fire crackled in the massive hearth, casting a warm glow that Cadence could only feel as a shift in temperature. Gabriel walked over to a crystal decanter, the glass clinking as he poured a generous measure of Macallan 25. He downed it in one swallow. "Sit," he ordered, guiding her to a tufted Chesterfield sofa. Cadence sat, her hands gripping her knees. 4 years ago," Gabriel began, his voice a low, dangerous whisper as he paced the Persian rug. "November 12th. My wife was getting into her car outside a restaurant in Little Italy. 4 pounds of C4 wired to the ignition. The coroner told me the blast pressure alone stopped her heart before the fire even reached her. So tell me, blind girl, how exactly did a corpse speak to you at Mount Sinai Hospital?" Cadence swallowed hard, her throat dry. "The coroner lied to you, or the people who paid him did?" Gabriel stopped pacing. "Explain." "I was 22, Cadence said, her voice shaking but gaining strength. "I was a patient at New York Presbyterian. Wait, no, it was the Mount Sinai trauma ward. I had undergone emergency surgery for a ruptured appendix. The ward was overflowing that night. It was chaos. Sirens. Doctors shouting." Gabriel stared at her, his jaw locked. He remembered the chaos. He had been locked down by the NYPD, screaming, fighting officers to get to the wreckage of his wife's car. They told him there was nothing left to see. They told him it was over. "They brought a woman in," Cadence continued, staring blankly ahead. "She was placed behind a privacy curtain right next to my bed. She was in agonizing pain. I could hear the nurses whispering. They said she had catastrophic burns, that the blast had blinded her. They were waiting for a surgical theater to open, but they knew she wasn't going to make it." Gabriel's glass slipped from his hand, shattering against the stone hearth. He didn't care. He dropped to one knee in front of Cadence, his hands hovering over hers. "You heard her." "She was crying," Cadence whispered, not from the pain, but from panic. She kept saying she needed to tell Gabriel. The nurses tried to sedate her, but she fought them. When the nurses left to get the attending physician, I reached my hand through the curtain. I took her hand. I told her I was there. I asked if I could call someone for her. Gabriel closed his eyes, a tear escaping and tracking down his scarred cheek. "What did she say?" "She asked if I was blind," Cadence said softly. I told her yes. She squeezed my hand so hard. She said, "The darkness is safe. The darkness keeps secrets." She asked me to memorize something. She said she didn't have much time. "Tell me," Gabriel demanded, his voice breaking. The ruthless mob boss, the man who had just executed a federal judge without a second thought, was kneeling on the floor, begging. Cadence took a deep breath. She said, "Tell my Gabriel that it wasn't the Lucchese family. The bomb wasn't meant for me. It was meant for him." Gabriel's blood ran cold. The Lucchese family had been blamed for the hit. Gabriel had spent 2 years systematically dismantling them, killing their capos, seizing their territories, starting a bloodbath that had painted the streets of New York red. "Who?" Gabriel whispered, his tone shifting from sorrow to pure, concentrated malice. "Who did she say planted the bomb?" Cadence hesitated. She could feel the violent energy radiating from him. She said, "Tell him the snake eats at his table. Tell him Verlin knows the scent of the explosive." Gabriel stood up slowly. The air in the room seemed to freeze. Verlin Marshall, his right-hand man. The man who had been by his side for a decade. The man who had just held a gun to Cadence's head an hour ago. Verlin, Gabriel repeated, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. "There's more," Cadence said, her voice trembling again. "She knew she was dying. She took something off her neck, a chain. She slipped it into my hand and told me to hide it. She said if the people who did this found out she survived the blast, even for an hour, they would kill anyone who heard her last words." Gabriel stepped closer. What was on the chain? Cadence reached into the collar of her modest wool sweater. She pulled out a delicate, slightly tarnished silver chain. Dangling from the end was a small, intricately engraved safety deposit box key. The number 402 was stamped into the metal. Gabriel reached out, his calloused fingers brushing against Cadence's skin as he took the key. He recognized it instantly. It was the key to a private vault at Chase Bank on 5th Avenue, an account Isabella kept under her maiden name, Moretti. "She told me to keep it hidden until I found the man with the silver Zippo lighter," Cadence whispered. "She said you would know what to do." Gabriel stared at the small metal key resting in his palm. His entire empire, his entire reality, had been built on a lie orchestrated by his own inner circle. He had slaughtered dozens of men in the name of a wife who had used her dying breaths to warn him of the true traitor. He looked down at Cadence. She was a civilian, entirely innocent. Yet she held the key to unraveling the deepest conspiracy in the New York underworld. If Verlin realized who Cadence was, or what she had just revealed, her life would be forfeit. "You didn't see anything at the plaza tonight," Gabriel said, his voice terrifyingly calm as he slipped the chain into his pocket. "No," Cadence agreed quickly. "Nothing. You are going to stay here," Gabriel told her, walking toward a heavy antique desk and pulling open a drawer. "In this house. You will have everything you need, but you will not leave these walls. If you step outside, Verlin's men will kill you before I can stop them." "I just want to go home," Cadence pleaded, tears welling in her blind eyes. "Please." "Your home isn't safe anymore, Cadence," Gabriel said, loading a fresh magazine into his sidearm. He racked the slide, the metallic clack echoing off the wood-paneled walls. "Because as of tonight, I am going to tear my own empire down to the foundation. And when the dust settles, the men who truly murdered my wife will drown in their own blood." Shadows lengthened across the mahogany floors of the Scarsdale estate as Gabriel prepared to leave. He had confined Cadence to the master suite, guarded only by Dominic, a man whose loyalty to the West family predated Verlin's treacherous rise. Gabriel traded his tailored suit jacket for a dark, tactical coat, the metal of his sidearm cold against his ribs. The revelation of his wife's final words had shattered the foundation of his reality, shifting his unending grief into a focused, lethal clarity. Gabriel slipped out of the estate through a subterranean service tunnel, intentionally bypassing his own security network. He drove a modest, unregistered sedan into Manhattan, the skyline a glittering testament to power and deception. Arriving at the Chase Bank on 5th Avenue, just as the morning shift began, he presented his late wife's identification credentials and the tarnished key Cadence had guarded for 4 agonizing years. The bank manager, a nervous man with wire-rimmed glasses, guided Gabriel into the sterile, echoing depths of the vault room. Box 402 sat in the middle of a massive steel wall. Gabriel turned the key. The lock yielded with a heavy, satisfying click. Inside the narrow metal drawer rested a thick, leather-bound ledger and a sleek, encrypted hard drive. Gabriel opened the ledger. Isabella's elegant, flowing handwriting filled the pages, chronicling a conspiracy that made Gabriel's stomach churn. Isabella had not been a passive wife. She had possessed a brilliant mind for forensic accounting. Months before her murder, she had noticed discrepancies in the syndicate's offshore accounts. She had quietly tracked the anomalies, unearthing a staggering web of betrayal. Gabriel's eyes darted across the pages, absorbing the devastating truth through Isabella's meticulous notes. The siphon. Verlin. Marshall had been systematically draining the organization's funds, hiding over $40 million in shell companies located in the Cayman Islands and Cyprus. The alliance. Verlin had forged a secret alliance with federal judge Richard Higgins. Higgins provided Verlin with sealed indictments and FBI wiretap schedules, allowing Verlin to maneuver rival families into federal traps while keeping Gabriel's organization exposed. The assassination plot. The C4 explosive placed under Isabella's car was never meant for her. Verlin had scheduled a meeting with Gabriel at that exact restaurant, intending to detonate the bomb when Gabriel turned the ignition. Isabella had taken the car earlier to confront Verlin with the ledger, unaware the trap was already armed. Gabriel closed the book. His jaw clenched so tightly, his teeth ached. Judge Higgins. The man Gabriel had executed merely 24 hours ago at the Plaza Hotel. Verlin had convinced Gabriel that Higgins was about to flip and wear a wire. In reality, Verlin was using Gabriel as the executioner to tie up his own loose ends. Higgins knew too much about the missing $40 million, and Verlin needed him permanently silenced. Gabriel had been a puppet, dancing on strings pulled by the man he called his brother. He had decimated rival families, consolidated power, and painted the streets red, all to avenge a wife murdered by his own right-hand man. While Gabriel was deep within the chase vault, paranoia began to fester within Verlin Marshall. Standing on the frozen docks of the Brooklyn Navy Yard, Verlin interrogated the cleanup crew he had dispatched to dispose of the blind girl's body. "What do you mean you didn't find her?" Verlin growled, slamming a terrified associate against a rusted shipping container. "Boss, I swear," the young man stammered, his eyes wide with panic. "We swept the pier. We checked the water. Gabriel left, but the girl wasn't in the river. She's gone." Verlin released the man, his mind racing. Gabriel had countermanded a direct order of execution. The ruthless kingpin never showed mercy. Why spare a blind piano tuner who had overheard a multi-million-dollar bribe? Unless she had said something. Unless she possessed leverage. Verlin pulled his encrypted phone from his coat and dialed the captain of Gabriel's mansion security. "Is the boss at the estate?" Verlin demanded. "No, sir," the guard replied over the static. "He left an hour ago, unescorted." "And the girl?" "Dominic has her locked in the master wing. Orders are no one goes in or out." A cold realization washed over Verlin. Gabriel knew. He didn't know how, and he didn't know what the blind girl had revealed, but Gabriel West was currently hunting for ghosts. If Gabriel uncovered the truth about Isabella, there would be nowhere on earth Verlin could hide. "Gather the strike team," Verlin ordered, his voice devoid of emotion. "Cut the hard lines to Scarsdale. Jam the cell signals. We are taking the estate tonight. No survivors." The Scarsdale mansion was a fortress. but a fortress is only as strong as the men defending it. By midnight, Verlin had bribed or eliminated the perimeter guards. Only Dominic remained fiercely loyal, stationed outside the master bedroom, where Cadence sat trembling on the edge of a four-poster bed. Gabriel arrived at the property line just as the estate was plunged into absolute darkness. The massive floodlights died. The security cameras went blind. The backup generators failed to kick in, sabotaged from the inside. He abandoned his sedan at the gates and sprinted through the manicured gardens, drawing his sidearm. He slipped through the kitchen entrance, moving like a phantom through the pitch-black corridors of his own home. He could hear the heavy, synchronized footsteps of a tactical team sweeping the lower levels. Verlin's men. Upstairs, Cadence clutched her carbon fiber cane, her heart hammering against her ribs. When the power died, the ambient hum of the HVAC system ceased. The sudden silence was a canvas, and Cadence's absolute pitch began to paint a terrifyingly vivid picture of the assault. She heard a silenced weapon cough in the hallway, followed by the heavy thud of a body hitting the Persian rug. Dominic. The heavy oak door to the master suite was kicked open. "Check the closets," a rough voice ordered. Cadence pressed herself against the velvet curtains, holding her breath. She could smell wet wool and the sharp scent of cordite. She heard the distinct click of a flashlight being engaged, the beam sweeping across the room. Suddenly, a massive hand clamped over her mouth. She thrashed, but a familiar scent washed over her: sandalwood, tobacco, and the metallic tang of a Zippo lighter. Gabriel. He had scaled the exterior balcony to reach her. He pulled her close, his lips brushing against her ear. "Do exactly as I say," he breathed, his voice barely a vibration. Gabriel stepped out from behind the curtain, his weapon raised. Two suppressed shots dropped the intruders before they could scream. The bodies hit the floor, their flashlights rolling across the hardwood, casting erratic shadows. "We are trapped," Gabriel whispered to Cadence, hastily reloading his weapon in the dark. "There are at least a dozen men between us and the garage. I can't see them in this pitch black." "I can," Cadence said softly, her fear miraculously giving way to an intense, hyper-focused calm. "Take my hand." Gabriel hesitated, then slipped his hand into hers. "They wear heavy combat boots," Cadence whispered, closing her sightless eyes, extending her hearing through the sprawling, silent mansion. The rubber squeaks on the marble, but thuds on the carpet. Their tactical gear rustles. I can hear them breathing. Gabriel nodded, though she couldn't see it. He allowed the blind woman to guide the most dangerous man in New York into the black abyss of the hallway. They moved with agonizing slowness. Cadence paused at the top of the grand staircase. She squeezed Gabriel's hand tightly, leaning close. "3 men," she breathed. "Landing below. 10 steps down. 1 is pacing, tapping a rifle barrel against his leg." Gabriel raised his weapon, judging the angle perfectly based on her precise directions. He fired 3 times. 3 heavy thuds echoed through the foyer. "Clear," Cadence whispered. They descended the stairs, a lethal symphony of sound and precision. Cadence mapped the darkness. She heard the scrape of a zipper, the shift of weight on a creaking floorboard, the shallow breaths of men hiding in ambush. With every whispered coordinate, Gabriel eliminated the threats. His shots were devastatingly accurate, guided by a woman who saw the world through echoes. Finally, they reached the grand foyer. The massive front doors were chained shut from the inside. "Gabriel!" a voice boomed from the upper balcony. Verlin Marshall stood at the top of the stairs, An emergency flare ignited in his left hand, casting a hellish red glow over the massacre. He held an automatic rifle in his right. Gabriel pushed Cadence behind a heavy marble pillar. He stepped out into the open, his weapon trained on his former brother. $40 million, Verlin, Gabriel called out, his voice a chilling echo in the cavernous space. Was my wife's life only worth $40 million? Verlin sneered, the red light dancing across his cruel features. She was in the way, Gabe. You were soft. You wanted to legitimize the business. You wanted to retire and play house. We are wolves. We don't retire. You planted the C4, Gabriel stated, a statement of undeniable fact. I did, Verlin confessed, raising his rifle. And I'm going to finish the job tonight. Verlin, Gabriel said softly, reaching into his pocket with his free hand. You forgot one detail. What's that? Gabriel pulled out the vintage silver Zippo lighter. He flipped the lid with a loud metallic clink. The sound was sharp, piercing the tense silence. Verlin's eyes darted instinctively toward the sound, a fatal microsecond of distraction. Gabriel didn't hesitate. He fired a single, perfect shot. The bullet struck Verlin in the center of his chest. The flare tumbled from his grip, bouncing down the marble stairs, hissing violently as Verlin's lifeless body collapsed over the banister and crashed into the foyer below. Silence descended upon the Scarsdale estate, heavy and absolute. Gabriel lowered his weapon. His breathing was ragged. The empire of lies was dead. The man who had orchestrated his unending nightmare had faced justice. He walked over to the pillar and gently placed his hand on Cadence's trembling shoulder. It's over, he told her softly. Weeks later, the New York underworld was thrown into chaos. Anonymous packages containing decrypted ledgers, offshore bank details, and evidence of federal corruption flooded the FBI and the Department of Justice. The West Syndicate dissolved overnight, its lieutenants arrested, its assets frozen. Gabriel vanished into the wind, leaving behind his empire and his demons. Cadence returned to her life in Manhattan. She still tuned pianos, her sensitive fingers finding harmony in the chaos of the city. One crisp autumn afternoon, she arrived at her apartment to find a small, beautifully wrapped package sitting on her kitchen counter. She untied the silk ribbon and opened the velvet box. Inside rested a heavy, intricately carved Steinway grand piano tuning hammer, crafted from solid silver. Beneath it was a braille note, embossed on thick, expensive cardstock. Cadence ran her fingers over the raised dots. A small, peaceful smile touched her lips. The darkness keeps secrets. Thank you for bringing me into the light. If this thrilling tale of betrayal, redemption, and unlikely alliances kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button and share it with your fellow drama lovers. Your support helps us bring more pulse-pounding, cinematic stories to life. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a plot twist. Drop a comment below telling us your favorite moment, and stay tuned for our next epic narrative adventure.